May 1945 marked the absolute collapse of the Third Reich, a chaotic moment where the hunters suddenly became the hunted across Europe. When a high-ranking SS commander stepped forward to surrender, he expected a formal, honorable military transition that would allow him to keep his sidearms as a symbol of his elite status. But he did not realize he was dealing with General George S. Patton, a man who saw right through the polished facade of tyranny. Today, we reveal the exact moment this arrogant officer tried to negotiate his terms, and the brutal, unforgettable response that Patton delivered to shatter his pride completely. The atmosphere in the American camp was thick with tension as the reality of victory began to settle over the battlefields. Soldiers who had spent months in the mud watched as the remnants of a defeated empire walked out of the shadows. For this specific SS leader, the war was over, but his deep-seated sense of superiority remained fully intact. He genuinely believed that his rank exempted him from the standard, humiliating procedures of total capitulation. The European theater was littered with the wreckage of a brutal conflict that had cost millions of innocent lives over 6 agonizing years. General Patton's Third Army had been tearing through Germany with relentless speed, capturing thousands of enemy combatants every single day. Among these prisoners were regular Wehrmacht soldiers, but there were also members of the fanatical paramilitary organizations responsible for the worst atrocities. Patton had maintained a strict, uncompromising stance throughout the entire campaign regarding how these different groups should be handled. He possessed a profound understanding of military history and recognized that true peace could only be established through absolute submission. When the news reached the command post that a prominent SS leader wished to surrender personally, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Everyone present knew that Patton would never tolerate any attempts at diplomatic posturing from men who had terrorized the continent. The stage was set for a psychological confrontation that would echo through the decades as a masterclass in definitive leadership. The German commander arrived at the designated location dressed in a pristine uniform that contrasted sharply with the battle-worn gear of the Americans. He carried himself with an insufferable air of nobility, refusing to acknowledge the reality that his cause was utterly destroyed. In his mind, he was an elite warrior who deserved to be treated with the highest degree of professional courtesy by his captors. He approached the American officers with a rigid posture, maintaining his gaze as if he were still in a position of absolute authority. The sidearm strapped to his waist was a beautifully crafted weapon, representing his power, his status, and his career. To hand it over unconditionally was to admit complete and total defeat, an outcome his pride simply could not accept. He requested an audience with the highest authority available, fully prepared to negotiate the specific terms of his captivity. The American guards watched him closely, their hands resting on their weapons, fully aware of the dangerous nature of the man before them. As the preliminary discussions began, the atmosphere grew increasingly cold as the German officer formally presented his audacious terms for surrender. He argued that as a professional gentleman of high military standing, he should be permitted to retain his personal dagger and pistol. He claimed that these items were essential to maintaining discipline among his remaining men during the upcoming transition period. This was a calculated psychological tactic designed to preserve a shred of dignity and authority in the face of total ruin. The American officers listening to this request were visibly disgusted by the sheer arrogance displayed by a representative of a broken regime. They knew that allowing an SS officer to keep his weapons was not only dangerous but a violation of everything they fought for. The request was immediately forwarded up the chain of command, destined for the desk of the legendary General Patton himself. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone awaited the decision that would define the terms of this capitulation. As we unpack this intense psychological standoff, please consider supporting historical preservation by hitting the subscribe button and giving this video a like, while also sharing it with someone who needs to hear this story of justice, and don't forget to drop a comment below sharing what you find most interesting about this clash of wills. The request made by the German officer was a direct challenge to the authority of the Allied forces. It was a test to see if the Americans would blink or if they would strictly enforce the rules of unconditional surrender. Patton was not a man to be trifled with, especially by individuals he considered to be part of a criminal enterprise rather than a legitimate army. He understood that symbols mattered immensely in warfare, and allowing this commander to keep his weapons would send the wrong message to everyone. The Allied soldiers had sacrificed too much to allow their defeated enemies to dictate terms at the final hour. When the message containing the German commander's request was delivered to General Patton, his reaction was instantaneous and entirely characteristic of his fierce nature. He did not hesitate for a single second, Nor did he enter into any form of diplomatic debate regarding the matter. Patton viewed the SS not as honorable military adversaries, but as a dangerous cabal that had brought ruin upon the world. The idea that one of their leaders would dare ask for special privileges filled him with a cold, righteous anger. He looked at the officer who brought him the message and prepared to deliver a directive that would leave no room for misinterpretation. His voice carried the weight of an entire army that had fought its way across Europe to crush tyranny. Patton knew that this moment required an absolute demonstration of power to ensure that the enemy understood their true position. There would be no compromises, no polite negotiations, and certainly no exceptions made for anyone wearing that specific uniform. The words Patton chose were sharp, direct, and designed to completely strip away any illusions the German commander still harbored about his status. Patton ordered his men to inform the SS officer that he was a prisoner of war, not a guest of honor. He stated clearly that all weapons, without exception, were to be surrendered immediately and without any conditions whatsoever. Patton went even further, implying that if the commander refused to disarm himself, the Americans would happily assist him in a much less polite manner. This response was a devastating psychological blow to the German officer's carefully constructed narrative of honor and nobility. It forced him to face the reality that he was completely powerless and at the mercy of the forces he had sought to destroy. The directive was carried back to the interrogation room, where the proud commander was eagerly awaiting a completely different answer. The American guards could hardly contain their satisfaction as they prepared to deliver the general's uncompromising ultimatum. Before we unveil the precise words that broke the German commander's spirit, take a quick moment to subscribe to our channel and like the video, then share it with someone who needs to hear this story of uncompromising leadership, and leave a comment down below about a fact you didn't know before this moment. The transition of power on the battlefield is always a delicate process, but Patton knew how to handle it with absolute authority. He refused to allow the defeated enemy to feel any sense of equality or mutual respect during the surrender. The historical reality was that the Allied forces were enforcing a total peace, which meant stripping the aggressors of every weapon. This event was a microcosm of the larger geopolitical reality unfolding across a broken and exhausted European continent. The old order was being dismantled piece by piece, starting with the very sidearms carried by its most fanatical defenders. When the American officer returned to the room and delivered Patton's exact words, the German commander's face visibly changed from arrogance to shock. He was told in no uncertain terms that his weapons were to be unbuckled and placed on the table immediately. The officer conveyed Patton's message that the time for negotiation had passed before the German had even arrived at the camp. The realization that he was being treated like any other common captive was a bitter pill for the SS leader to swallow. His posture began to deflate as the weight of his absolute helplessness finally sunk into his consciousness. The room was silent as the German officer reached slowly for his waist, his hands trembling slightly under the watchful eyes of his captors. The illusion of the elite warrior caste vanished in that single, agonizing moment of forced submission. He realized that Patton was not a politician looking for a compromise, but a warrior who demanded total victory. The sidearm was unbuckled and placed on the wooden table with a heavy, metallic thud that signaled the definitive end of the commander's authority. It was followed by his personal dagger, both items now transformed from symbols of power into mere trophies of a lost war. The American soldiers immediately stepped forward to secure the weapons, ensuring that the disarmament was thoroughly completed. The German officer stood there, stripped of his tools of violence, looking suddenly much older and significantly less imposing than before. Patton's psychological victory was complete without the general even needing to step into the same room as the captive. By treating the demand with utter contempt, Patton had asserted the moral and physical dominance of the Allied cause. This interaction demonstrated that the rules of engagement had changed permanently, and the old regime would find no quarter. The defeated commander was then led away to a secure holding area, joining the ranks of thousands of others. This specific incident became a legendary anecdote within the Third Army, perfectly illustrating Patton's approach to the post-war reality. He understood that the end of combat operations did not mean the immediate end of the ideological struggle that had caused the war. By refusing to grant even the smallest concession to the SS leader, Patton set a precedent for how his entire command would handle surrenders. He made it clear to his subordinates that any attempt by enemy officers to retain their prestige must be crushed. The story spread quickly among the ranks, boosting the morale of American soldiers who appreciated their general's tough stance. It served as a reminder that the sacrifices made on the battlefield were being honored through strict justice at the negotiation table. Patton's actions reflected a broader understanding that a lasting peace required the complete dismantling of the enemy's military identity. The historical significance of this confrontation lies in its clear demonstration of accountability and the refusal to normalize war crimes. The SS was later declared a criminal organization during the Nuremberg trials, validating the exact perspective that Patton had acted upon. Regular military honors were reserved for those who had fought within the boundaries of traditional warfare, not for agents of terror. Patton's refusal to allow the commander to keep his weapons was a physical manifestation of this essential moral boundary. It sent a clear message to the surviving German leadership that the Allied forces would not tolerate any revisionist history. The weapons collected from these officers were often kept as historical artifacts or destroyed, ensuring they could never be used again. This act of disarmament was a necessary step in the long, painful process of denazification that Europe desperately required. Looking back at the events of May 1945, the interactions between Allied generals and defeated commanders shaped the immediate post-war environment. Patton's leadership style was often controversial, but his handling of this specific surrender showed an unwavering commitment to the principle of total victory. He knew that any sign of weakness or unnecessary leniency would be exploited by an enemy that had spent years mastering manipulation. By enforcing a strict policy of immediate disarmament, he ensured the safety of his troops and the integrity of the Allied mission. The story of the SS commander who wanted to keep his weapons remains a powerful example of how leadership must hold the line. It serves as a reminder that true authority is not derived from titles or uniforms, but from the moral courage to enforce justice. The legacy of General George S. Patton is defined by moments like these, where his instincts as a commander aligned perfectly with historical necessity. He was a man built for conflict, but he also understood how to conclude a conflict in a way that left no doubt about who won. The disarmament of the SS commander was not just about two weapons on a table. It was about the unconditional surrender of an entire ideology. As the years have passed, these historical accounts remind us of the complexities and the intense human drama that occurred behind the scenes. The lessons of leadership, accountability, and the refusal to compromise with tyranny remain as relevant today as they were in the ruins of Europe. Patton's voice, through his actions, continues to speak to us about the importance of standing firm when the stakes are highest. If this historical encounter resonated with your sense of justice, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear this story today, while leaving a comment about what you didn't know before or what truly fascinated you the most about George Patton's enduring legacy. The stories of the Second World War are filled with grand strategies and massive troop movements, but it is often these small, personal confrontations that reveal the true character of the individuals involved. Understanding the psychological dynamics of surrender helps us appreciate the immense effort required to transition from global war to a lasting peace. General Patton's uncompromising stance in the face of arrogance remains a definitive chapter in that great historical narrative. Thank you for journeying back in time with us to witness the moment when justice was delivered with absolute certainty.